Hi everyone, we are going to be speaking today about the transition from the Umayyads to the Abbasids. What in the world does that mean? Basically, when one dynasty left, the Umayyads, and another replaced it, the Abbasids. And this was a fraught time, as always, as every moment seems to be, uh, when people had to decide what it is that leadership actually meant and what were they frustrated with now about 150 years, 120 years after the initial emergence of Islam. So just a bit of background. Let's just remember what period we're talking about. 570, Muhammad born, somewhere around then. Um, and really it's about 622 that the Hijrah, when Muhammad leaves Mecca, goes to Medina, that's when the Islamic calendar starts, ends up retaking Mecca by 630, and then he dies in 632, pretty shortly thereafter. So what ends up happening, then we have a sort of succession question, what rights does the new leader have, how should he be selected? Ultimately, they decide he has to come from the family of the tribe of the Quraysh. But then there's other questions as to what other qualities give precedence to a leader. And they picked basically kind of early companions, early followers of the Prophet Muhammad, like Abu Bakr, one of his closest friends, and I think also brother-in-law. Now, Abu Bakr doesn't last very long because he dies shortly thereafter, but he does start kind of what it seems these first campaigns of expansion into Syria and Iraq. Eventually, these tensions over fight over succession, who should be a succession or not, spills over into a fight between Ali and Muawiyah, nephew of a caliph who died under mysterious or somewhat strange circumstances, which leads to kind of the first civil war. Ali kind of wins, but then he gets assassinated by a rogue group of followers who aren't happy the fact that he was negotiating. Muawiyah takes over, starts basically the Umayyad dynasty. That's the important part. Muawiyah is slowly transitioning this world, now 50 years past the initial conquest, into an actual state, right? He's slowly turning things into using Arabic in everyday administration, etc. But the real shift doesn't happen until the reign of Abdul Malik, who is the guy who wins out after the second civil war. And he ended up establishing a continuation of the Umayyad dynasty. More importantly, basically sets up Arabic as the political language and the official bureaucratic language of this empire, right? So they're no longer going to be assimilated into Persian or Byzantine Greek worlds, but they're actually slowly creating their own language, their own culture of administration. They create their own form of artistic culture, as we've been discussing. And more and more tensions, though, appear over the question of what is the Muslim community and what do the conquests mean by the 700s. And around this time, those tensions spill over into what's called the Abbasid Revolution, which is what we'll be talking about today. So who in the world are the Abbasids? Why are they called Abbasids? Remember, the ID ending is a sort of Latin suffix that is added to a name, in this case Abbas. They are a family that claim to be descendants of the Prophet Muhammad's paternal uncle Abbas. So they're not direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. Remember, the only people who could claim that were the children of Ali, and Ali was married to Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. Instead, they were kind of vaguely a part of the larger family, and they were living in a place in Jordan, today's Jordan, called the Humayma, basically keeping low, hunting, participating in campaigns, etc. Now, they would be the ones to start this new dynasty called the Abbasid dynasty. And in fact, Abbas never really ruled. It wasn't even an actual important person. But that's where they took the name, and that's the kind of family that they call themselves after. Okay, now one part Abbasid, second part revolution. Why is it a revolution? Why is it not just like a takeover or a general development? Because they really, or at least what they claim to be doing, is that they were going to restart the Islamic polity to create a new and pure vision of the Islamic empire, or rather rulership, that was open to the entire community and would be under the family of the Prophet. And that's the key idea here, is that the family of the Prophet is going to ensure the probity and also the in the success of this enterprise, because people were not happy after almost 100 years of Umayyad rule. We'll get into why they weren't happy. Another background thing, remember how big the Islamic Empire is at this time by 750. It basically stretches all the way out into Spain, North Africa, Morocco. The capital was in Damascus, but then it was also stretching out basically into what's this, today Uzbekistan, and soon afterwards China. It's going down into Pakistan, into the Sindh, etc. Interestingly enough, it doesn't cross over to Ethiopia very much, but and it's also stopped here on the border. A border is created, a frontier is created between the Byzantines and the Islamic Empire. So this is a huge, huge space. There's now been multiple generations of conquests of basically nomadic fighters who are moving out further and further into frontier or garrison cities, and then attacking and expanding it even further. So at this point, there's, for example, garrison cities in Marv and over here, which is quite far away from Damascus, for example. Now, as I pointed out, the Abbasids essentially they claim that they're bringing in a revolution. They're going to bring a new just rule of the family of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the thing is, this is a common belief. Everyone thinks that, okay, the Prophet Muhammad created this perfect religion. He started this thing that obviously was favored by God, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to conquer so much space and succeed so well. And so we need to get back to that original animating spirit, and we can do that best not by following the descendants of Bani Umayyad, the Umayyads, but by going actually to the actual family of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the trick here is they were not actually literal descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. As I said, they're actually descendants of his uncle, the Prophet's uncle. So how did they pull it off? But first, let me also go back and explain why were people now willing to risk it all to start a rebellion and try to overthrow the Umayyads. Now, there's a bunch of different things that the Umayyads have been doing since the reign of Abd al-Malik that rub people the wrong way in different senses. One is this general increase in political power that had been accumulating to the new leader. So if you remember, originally the term that they used for the leader of the Muslim or Islamic community, or the believer community, was called Amir al-Mu'minin, the commander of the believers. After Abd al-Malik, a new term gets used, which is Khalifat Allah, the deputy of God. Right, so this is a very different thing. Being a commander of believers, you're just like at the head of believers and you're part of the equal. If you're the deputy of God, you're like literally his representative. And it's kind of difficult to have civil disagreements with the deputy of God. Often this results, people were frustrated at this sort of power grab and this idea that the caliph, the Khalifa, is now all of a sudden somehow connected to God. Okay, so there was a frustration with that development, the new kind of, not say religious powers that the caliph was taking on, but some of the claims that the caliph was making and kind of the centralization of religious legitimacy in his office. The other side is that these people the Umayyads were very dependent on the troops in Syria. That was their core power base, right? And they were dependent on both nomadic and settled troops. And in fact, there was a bunch of Arab tribes all around Damascus and Syria. One of them was called the Kalb. And the Umayyads kept, for example, intermarrying not with the Prophet's family, but actually with the daughters of some of these tribal leaders. And of course, that made sense because they needed that support to keep their armies in check and to make everything work out. But many other soldiers, many people fighting in different frontier and different garrison towns were saying, well, why are the Damascene troops, the Syrian corps, getting more money, better privileges, choicer positions? Why are they being promoted and we're not? So that was a source of tension. And then within this Damascene, within their Syrian troops, basically the army had kind of factionalized between essentially northern and southern Arabs. This is very complicated, but the northern ones were called the Qais, the southern ones are called the Yemen or Yaman, that is from Yemen. They weren't really from Yemen, but that was how they named themselves. There's other names for them as well. And they were basically constantly fighting with each other, vying for positions, undermining each other, and also ultimately dismantling the power of the army itself to the point where eventually it wasn't able to fight, and that factionalism ended up getting the caliph Walid II killed. And the fourth thing that was being created here is that because of these entrenched privileges that were being given to the Syrian army, to the family of the Umayyads, to some of the factions within the Syrian army, that is the Qais or the Yemen ones, what that meant is that all the other Arabs, soldiers, and now the new converts and their clients, basically the clients, people attached to these Arab soldiers, were now kind of sidelined, especially non-Arabs, right, who wanted essentially equality because they said, well, we're Muslims, we've become clients, we've converted, we're free people. So why shouldn't we be treated the same way? Why shouldn't we get the same tax benefits, the same stipends, etc.? Why is there a sort of Arab elite at the top of the social order when technically we are all Muslims? So these were all the different tensions that were occurring. And let me just jump in very quickly into especially this question about Muslim converts versus non-Muslim converts. So to think about it, essentially initially the conquests were pretty simple. The Arabs armies went out. I mean, like there are a bunch of nomadic groups not fighting each other anymore. They stream out of Arabia. They start conquering places. They jump into this power vacuum left between the Sasanians, after the Sasanians and the Byzantines have been fighting each other for 50 years, and they quickly take over. And so initially, it's basically Arab conquerors who are Muslim over a group of non-Muslims who are cultivators or living in the cities, and they're the ones paying the taxes, okay? The Muslims the Muslim Arabs pay taxes as well, but they pay a zakat tax. The non-Muslims pay a jizya tax. And anyone who has land, which is 90% of the population is living on the land or working the land, is paying a land tax called the kharaj. Now, the problem is initially most of these landowners are non-Muslim, but over time you have two things happening. One is that as different groups are being conquered and entering in as clients, then they're slowly they're converting. And now they're Muslims, they're settling down in cities. Previously nomadic Arabs, after a few generations, are settling in cities. They're not as interested in going on campaign and fighting all the time. They're no longer nomadic. Some of them are even farming, etc. What is the tax situation of these people? Because they're no longer soldiers, but they're not also subject Muslims, non-subject Muslims. And then also what happens with the people who were not Arabs who converted and are now Muslims? What taxes should they be paying? Should they be paying the jizya? Should they be paying the kharaj? What is going on? Um, how do you figure out this space of converts? So the basic solution that comes in at this time is that land tax is taken regardless of religion. But this pissed off a lot of people. Um, so there was frustration about that. And this was a constant tension, which is now that this empire, which you can see here, stretched very, very far and had multiple generations of Muslims and Arabs settled across it in various garrison cities and now are basically becoming civilianized. What kind of taxes should they pay? What kind of benefits should they pay? How does this initially expansive empire, which is ultimately a military project that's just redistributing booty, become a stable empire based on taxes and equal treatment? Um, so how does this whole thing start? Okay, the Abbasid hometown is in Homaima in Jordan over here. They found there was a lot of tension, people creating kind of mini rebellions in Kufa over here. But the place that it really emerged is in this place, Khorasan, which is basically eastern Iran today. But you can see it's eastern Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, this area. More particularly, these places like Nishapur, Marv, which is in Turkmenistan, Balkh, which is in Uzbekistan, and Bukhara. Now, why is Khorasan that place? One, because it's a place where non-Muslims and converts and Arabs kind of combine together to form into a new post-conquest identity, essentially. There was more Arab settlers out there. They settled down. They became civilianized. But there's also a lot more converts out there. A lot more people converted, often to avoid taxes, etc. And therefore, they became much more. They had more demands, right? So then they were resentful about the privileges that the traditional elite based in Medina or Damascus had. At the same time, they were on the frontier, and therefore they were constantly being militarized and being prepared for war. And so this was where that population, kind of post-tribal Arab Muslim convert population emerged from, that forms the basis of the Abbasid armies. And so the Abbasids basically send an agent, this guy named Abu Muslim, out, a secret agent, to Khorasan. He kind of, is asking around, saying, prepare yourselves, wait, a guy is going to come and he's going to help us out. One of the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad is going to start something. He's raising awareness, if you could say that, of the coming fight. Now, of course, he's just one of many other people kind of agitating at that time. By the way, this is a picture of Marv today, not much there. And so there's a lot of different people agitating at that time, many different people claiming to be part of the Prophet's family. And again, the idea of the Prophet's family, the Ahl al-Bayt, literally the people of the Prophet's house, didn't mean direct descent. It could be kind of more indirect. So there was this guy Mukhtar in 680s, who actually, before this period that we're talking about, he was called Muhammad, son of the Hanafiya. That is, Muhammad is son of the Hanafiya, the Hanafi woman. The Hanafis were a tribe, and he was actually Ali's son from a slave. So he claimed to be part of the family, but his mom was a slave. Other people, other descendants, claim to be associated with Ali through a brother, etc. So it was a pretty expansive idea of the Prophet's family. And so the Abbasids kept saying, we're the Abbasids. Well, they said, we're family, we're working towards restoring the Prophet's family, but they never announced who exactly they were pushing, who was going to be this new leader. And in fact, it was really pretty open. There was a lot of possibilities. There was, of course, hereditary succession as to choosing which leader from the Prophet's house. So you're going to go with a direct descendant from Ali. Or there could be, the previous leader could designate his leader. So if you had 2 or 3 sons, you can say this son of mine is the leader, or maybe even go to another person. And then there was also the idea that ultimately, leadership goes to those who are brave enough to take it and have the effective means to seize power. And those three ideas combined, and ultimately, the Abbasids were able to kind of combine that all together and start this rebellion. They started marching Abu Muslim started marching from Khorasan towards Damascus, wearing black. And for that reason, they basically had these black flags, which is what the members of ISIS, if you guys remember ISIS from about 10 years ago, when they decided to create like their own Islamic state and imagine their own Islamic revolution in the middle of Iraq and Syria, they actually took over a lot of the kind of signifiers of the Abbasids, such as having the black flag and wearing black. So basically, to make a long story short, this guy Abu Abbas of the Abbasid family declares himself caliph with the support of the Kufans and the Khurasanis. He takes a renal name, basically a formal name, called Al-Saffah, the bloodshedder, the blood spiller, pretty gruesome. His main accomplishment is basically fighting the Umayyads, whose army just can't stand up to them, quickly lose, and then basically Al-Saffah spends most of his time hunting down these Umayyads in different ways. One of them escapes, right? Basically, every one of them is killed, but one descendant of the Umayyads escapes, Abdurrahman III. He runs off to the far west to Morocco, crosses over to Spain, and basically takes over Spain and creates a second Umayyad dynasty there, and that is basically going to run Spain, Islamic Spain, as its own world, with the capital in Cordoba and elsewhere. And that, over a couple centuries, becomes another major Islamic center. But of course, it's so far away that it just can't easily be controlled or in any way be brought back into the fold. But this guy, As-Saffah, dies relatively quickly. And Al-Mansur comes to power. Al-Mansur is another renal name. It means the victorious, the conqueror. And he becomes caliph. Now, the whole trick in this, and this is what the Abbasids did, is that they finally, when they come to power, they finally name themselves. They said, well, we are the ones who are actually the descendants of the Prophet's family. They're not going to go with the other, the actual descendants of Ali. And so they basically now have to put down a bit of dissent. They put that down in different ways. They use their general Abu Muslim to great use, but ultimately they're very afraid of the pull he has, especially amongst their Khurasani troops. He refuses to, change positions when he's demoted from governor, and so they invite him to the capital, and then they murder him. And during this time, they're kind of half the time out of Humayma, half the some in Medina, some in Damascus, and they realize they need a new place. They need a new capital, and they create a new capital called Madinat as-Salam, the city of peace, which will be known as Baghdad. Baghdad is actually very close to the former Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon, which is around here. More importantly, it's between the two major rivers of Iraq, an extremely fertile place, very close to the Sawad, the kind of black earth that was extremely fertile and created a lot of tax revenue, but it was also much more closer to Iran, to Khorasan, and to their power base. And so we again see a new shift in capital. One of the interesting things is that they take a lot of time planning Baghdad. They basically consult with Christian priests and astrologers. They bring in Jewish soothsayers and all sorts of different people to figure out the most auspicious format and date for the creation of their new capital city. Interestingly, I think too, double down on the astrological property of the city. The city is round. In fact, this round city is where the palace is. You can actually see the palace is at the very center, and all around is different villas, and then there's kind of different boulevards leading to that. Then there's a ring around it of their houses, and then around that is a set of other canals and palaces, etc. And the whole city is basically ringed by different canals, which allow people to move and jump around the city in different ways. Now, once they established it, they quickly grew. Why did they create a new capital? As I pointed out, they wanted to be closer to the tax revenues of the Sawad, the rich earth of Iraq, but they also wanted to be close to Khorasan. But more importantly, they basically wanted to invent a new capital in a new space that they could control. Damascus was the space of the Umayyads. The tribes there were loyal to them, but they also needed a way to reward supporters. And so one of the ways they did it is by giving generals and other major officials essentially kind of empty plots of land to develop and then to sell at a profit. And that was a way for them, as a sort of giant real estate development plot. They created a new capital that was then used to pay off their supporters. That's actually still a common way of doing things. For example, Egypt keeps creating new capitals to reinvent itself after each administration. In fact, there's a new capital being built now, which seems horrible, but probably there's a lot of real estate investment and collusion going on there. Now, we're not going to get the Abbasids basically last technically until around 1258 when the Mongols take them out. But from 750 to 1250, that's pretty long, but really they're kind of, by 1000, they're not really a force anymore. And the caliph, the Abbasid caliph, is just kind of a de facto ruler of Baghdad. But for 250 years, they set up a dynasty that is basically the strongest and most powerful in the world, centered in Baghdad. And each of them take a kind of perennial name. These are the most important. So after Safah and Mansur, there's a figure named Mahdi and Hadi. Then Rashid, who's often known as Harun al-Rashid, who's often identified in stories, etc., as a kind of the peak of Abbasid power. And then Amin and Ma'mun. And after that, it gets a bit complicated. But within this, they still have a basic problem of succession. There's still this idea that succession can go to any male heir. They still have problems of some heirs try to designate or come into agreement, but it just never works out. Oftentimes, as we'll see, the Abbasids break out into civil war in different ways, but we'll talk about that soon.